Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the Bleav Network. Check out Bleav in Astros with Mike Stanton and Bleav in Texans with Cecil Shorts. Lots of good stuff with the Bleav guys. And joining me is my co-host, Stephen Kerr. 65 plus years in sports journalism between the two of us. Later in the show, how are Sengun and Jabari taking their game to the next level? We're going to discuss that. And how much worse is CJ Stroud this year? And what did the Red Sox do that might help the Astros? But Stephen, the big storyline today is Azeez Al-Shaair's 3-game suspension. Nell Hewitt was not bad in the run game when he was starting earlier, but losing Azeez is going to hurt the pass defense as we hit this huge Texans 3-game stretch.
I know, Robert, and it's just that, injuries are bad enough, right? But the Texans defense has been hit with multiple suspensions throughout the year. You had Danico Autry, then you had Mario Edwards. Now you have Azeez. You just don't, especially when you're thin at certain positions, this is really the last thing you need is to keep having suspensions. You're just fortunate that you haven't had even more injuries on the defensive side than you already have.
Yeah, and depth's a major factor with 5 days between Miami and KC and 3 days between KC and Baltimore coming up. The good news, reports of Christian Harris returning. Where have we heard that before? But Harris, not a middle linebacker. That's the deal. He's not the quarterback of the defense. He's a massive addition to the linebacking core for sure. If he's late last year's Christian Harris, but Stephen, Azeez is the quarterback of this defense.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why it hurts that, regardless, I know we'll talk about it more, but regardless of which way you think it should have gone, it's just something that the Texans just couldn't afford to have, especially, as you said, coming into this 3-game stretch here.
Do I believe Azeez deserved to be suspended for the hit? Yeah, he deserved it. I talked about it on the post-game show. When you lead with the forearm on a QB, that's the risk you take. Some will argue that if the forearm's into the chest, it wouldn't matter. He slid, but you got to be aware of who's running with the football. The quarterback can always slide, so tackle with your hands and don't launch yourself. And Stephen, was a 3-game suspension excessive and overboard? Absolutely. I do agree about that. As Caserio pointed out, he had no prior suspensions, and I assumed he'd get 1 game because really he had already lost half a game with the ejection on Sunday.
I think a lot of it, Robert, is just by reputation. And I'm not saying that's fair, but, Azeez has kind of developed that reputation. Didn't he have a similar hit on Caleb Williams of the Bears earlier in the season? And then I think he's had some other personal fouls that have really hurt the Texans. So, once you develop that reputation, the league tends to want to make an example of you. And that may have been what happened with Azeez. Do I think it's fair or do I think it's excessive? Yeah, I absolutely think it's excessive. I think depending on who you ask, it might have been a bit much. You could say that Trevor Lawrence needed to really, if you're going to slide, you better slide and you better make sure that you're sliding. But at the same time, these defensive players are being restricted so much when it comes to tackling. I know Tom kind of addressed that too when he disagreed with you on the postgame show. That these guys, it's like they almost can't do this and can't do that and can't do that. It starts to get a little muddy and I'm sure a bit frustrating when all you're trying to do is make the hit and stop the guy from running.
A couple of things that you talked about, I want to hit. First of all, you're talking about, the reputation. At the Bears game, you look back and it's like, well, he wasn't called for a personal foul. He kind of got a punch in on the sideline. They didn't do anything about the punch, but never was called for a personal foul. It was a legal hit. He hit the guy inbounds, hit the quarterback, Caleb Williams, inbounds. Caserio rightfully angry, though, at the statement that the league put out because I don't know his history before the Texans, but this is not somebody that I had heard was just a personal foul gatherer and a roughing guy. The final paragraph looked like an ESPN producer wrote it, Stephen. It said, quote, "Your lack of sportsmanship and respect for the game of football and all those who play, coach, and enjoy watching it is troubling and does not reflect the core values of the NFL," unquote. Now, Stephen, that quote by the NFL, over the top, but keep in mind, the preceding paragraph mentions Azeez going ballistic when he was escorted to the locker room after this incident. And I knew that Azeez insanity right there and the likes to fight guy in the bar that he looked like in that moment would make the suspension worse. And I think that's really colored the NFL. I mean, there was a personal foul the week before, but it wasn't anything over the top or ridiculous. It was just like right on the sidelines. I thought he could have held himself back, but yeah, I was not a fan of how the NFL sort of handled this. But at the same time, I did think that, he made himself look a lot worse with that just insanity going into the locker room.
Yeah, that may have been what the league was referring to, but it is troubling in the sense that it almost sounds like, as I just said, they have labeled him with a reputation. When you make a statement like that, that tells me that you're a repeat offender that has done this more than once. Honestly, Robert, I think in Azeez's case, I don't think he's a dirty player. I think he's just an aggressive player that tends to get a bit over-aggressive at times. And I don't know, if you're a coach, how do you harness that? I mean, obviously, you want your guys to be aggressive. You want them to hit hard, but you want them to do it legally, of course. You also don't want them to do it. There's never a right time to have a personal foul penalty, but you don't want to do it to the point where it's going to cause you to get flags that are going to hurt your team and, cause you to get ejected from the game and things of that nature.
Yeah, and people can say, "Oh, how can you defend the league for suspending him because this reason or that reason?" I am not a person that just goes, "Okay, this is a Texan. I'm going to defend him to the hilt." But at the same time, to look at what happened, 3.5 games for this with no priors as far as suspension goes. I just think that was just way over the top. And it's interesting, you were talking earlier, and Stephen, I wanted to get to this, how the league does this and how these plays play out. And I thought this was real interesting because ex-Browns tackle Joe Thomas tweeted, quote, and this is the Hall of Famer, Joe Thomas. Right. He said, "This hit was malicious and has no place in our game, but the NFL needs to get the weaponized quarterback slide out of the game. As dangerous as hits on a QB are, when he chooses to slide, we need to stop allowing QBs to fake slide or late slide in order to gain advantage and confuse defenders if the quarterback is sliding or not." So basically that's the Patrick Mahomes thing. And it'd go a long way, Joe said, towards making those terrible calls or taking those terrible calls out of the game, the hits and that sort of thing, and making things more safe. A late slide, fake slide, or acting like you're going to go out of bounds and then skirting forward for a few more yards. These are all things that need to be 15-yard penalties against the offense. And it's about time the NFL refs started marking the ball down immediately when the quarterback starts to slide, which is the rule, by the way, exclamation point. That's what Joe Thomas had to say. It's hard to argue, Stephen.
Well, yeah, I mean, that kind of goes back to what I just said, that, Trevor Lawrence or anyone like that, you've got to clearly define if you're going down, because if you're not, yeah, he could easily just say, "Oh, I'm going to slide," and then look like it, it's like faking a fair catch and then continuing to run. It's just, yeah, there has to be a clear definition of these rules. Otherwise, calls like this are going to happen. I thought it's interesting, he said it was a malicious hit, yet at the same time, he's talking about how Lawrence needs to be more definitive about whether he's going to slide, that they need to change the rules. So I'm not sure I quite understand what his point is on that, but he certainly makes some great points in that the rule needs to be clear and it needs to be clearly defined.
I guess he's saying that basically if you don't have the Patrick Mahomes trying to game the system, then other defenders are not worried about it. Because look, if you're a defensive guy and you see a quarterback and he fake slide and then gains 15 more yards, you're like, well, I might as well have hit him really hard and make him pay for it if he was going to get 15 more yards on me anyway because he was fake sliding. Again, Trevor Lawrence, I don't think that was what happened in that particular play, but I think it's just Joe Thomas like, hey, we've got a situation here where offensive guys have such a huge advantage. These quarterbacks are taking advantage of it.
Well, that's exactly right. As I just said, the fact that the defensive guys, there are so many things that you can't do that to put even more restrictions on me. You got to remember, you have to stop on a dime on so many occasions. And sometimes it's just impossible to do that. You're going to hit the guy. If you're that close to him and all of a sudden he puts on the brakes or he starts sliding, you don't have enough time to stop and you hit him, you're going to get flagged. So yeah, it's just a real difficult situation, Robert. And I don't know if it's probably one of those things. There isn't a clear resolution, a good answer to it, especially with the way the rules are in the NFL right now.
And they've allowed or disallowed the fake slide in college. That is now a rule that you can't do it in college.
Right,
Why not just
right.
move it to the NFL? The NFL seems like they're slow to act or react or whatever.
Does that surprise you? When it's not really.
No. And this is like the normal thing. And I don't understand why the NFL is always like, you're behind on some of your ideas. You're behind the XFL. You're behind college football.
I was going to say it took, leagues like the XFL, the USFL to get them to change some of the rules, like with the extra point conversions and other things. It took other leagues trying to compete with you before you go, oh, maybe we should make some changes. It's interesting.
Boy, I've got some bad news for you, Bobby Slowik haters out there. It's Tuesday. It's the start of the bye week, and he's still got the offensive coordinator job. So you're stuck with him the rest of the way. Making the change Sunday or Monday, Stephen, that was the last logical time to do this.
It was, Robert, and honestly, I just did not think it was going to happen. It's a guy that you locked up to kind of make sure that he didn't leave this year. You're not going to fire him at this point right now, no matter what the fans are calling for and no matter what you're wishing for. And yeah, with the bye week, usually you're going to do that Sunday, Monday. By Tuesday, it's probably not going to happen. I think if any changes are going to be made at all, it's going to be at the end of the season. The Texans they're 8-5. It's not like, if they were 5-8, maybe, but they're 8-5. They're still leading the division. If you think about it from a coaching or analytical standpoint, it just doesn't make sense to do it at this point in time. Yes, there are holes in the offense. Yes, Slowik is to blame for a lot of them. But if you're looking at D'Amico Ryans and the coaching and the ownership, it's not something that I think they're going to point to and say, oh, we've got to make a change now, and the bye week's the time to do it. So it did not surprise me, or has not surprised me, that it hasn't happened yet.
One guy that everybody's talked about is Slowik, but the other part of this offense is CJ Stroud. Yeah. He's got a passer rating right now above 100, a total of he's had a passer rating, I should say, a total of 5 times that's above 100 after 13 games. That's last year compared to 3 times this year. So a couple less times. He's had a really great game for you at this point in the season, even though 8-5, same record. His passer rating for the season last year, 100.3 compared to 87.9 this year. His completion percentage, nearly identical. So technically the accuracy hasn't changed. But last year at this point, he had 19 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. This year, 15 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. He's averaging 1 less yards per attempt this year. His sack percentage last year, this one I know everybody's keeping an eye out on, 7.08%. It's 9.5% this year. So obviously a big jump. But Stephen, I wanted to make note that it's only 7.6% since the Lions game, the one where Jared Patterson and Juice Scruggs took over the Kenyon Green spot.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And I think, we've talked about this before. It just, without even looking at the numbers, I think it's obvious that CJ is not having quite the same year as he did last year. And I think a lot of it is mental when you talk about the hesitancy and holding the ball too long. One of the things I've noticed is that he's missing a number of wide receivers that are open. Tank Dell, there were a couple of occasions where Tank Dell was open. Dalton Schultz, I think, was open at one point, in games throughout the season. And he's looking somewhere else. He doesn't notice they're open. He's holding the ball too long. He gets a sack or he throws an interception because he has to wait, throw at the last second. So I just think a lot of it somehow, and not all of it, but a lot of it seems to have become mental, as well as just the fact that the physical skills are obviously not what they were last year.
And the interception rate, that wasn't realistic going forward. That was a crazy.
No, certainly not. I mean, it's just he waited till almost the end of the season to get an interception last year.
Yeah, but the other things, those are the concerns, the stuff that you're talking about, Stephen. And he just missed some of the bigger throws. And you know what else? He's got weapons this year that are better consistently with Stephon Diggs, and the way Nico is playing this year is just crazy great. And the only other thing that really baffles you is we talked about it in the post-game show, Tank Dell, like what's happened to their chemistry? It just doesn't seem like it's there this year for some reason.
Yeah, I know. We've talked about that, really throughout the season, because Tank isn't getting the numbers, that he's been getting. So, I think some of that is probably on him. And, the fact that especially early in the season, when you had Diggs healthy, when you had Collins healthy, both of them, it just, you're going to spread the ball around a little bit more. And then you have Joe Mixon that you can throw to every once in a while. So I know that's some of it, but perhaps in some way that has caused that chemistry to be lost. So there are a number of factors that have contributed to CJ Stroud's, I wouldn't say demise, certainly, because they're 8-5, as I said, but definitely the lower numbers and just the expectations just haven't quite been met from what he did last year.
All right, just a few seconds away, we're going to talk about that incredible, amazing, kind of perfect Rockets week in a lot of ways. But first, quick reminder, look for USA Today Texans analyst John Crumpler in the next couple of days. He's scheduled to join me. And don't forget our live Texans postgame shows after every game. Tom Chavaria and I break it all down. And please support our content by giving us a thumbs up, commenting, and subscribing for free on YouTube. Or if you're watching, you can also listen on your favorite podcast app. All right, Stephen, the Rockets are a half game out of first in the West as we speak Tuesday afternoon. They just beat OKC, the first place team and betting favorites to come out of the West, thanks to clutch plays down the stretch in the fourth quarter. That was after winning back-to-back overtime road games with more clutch play. Tell me why that this isn't the most fun team in Houston sports right now. More fun than the Texans, more fun than the Astros. The fun quotient is off the chart, Steve.
Oh, gosh, without question, Robert. And, especially when you consider we had higher expectations for the Rockets this year. We expected them to have a season and make the playoffs. But honestly, if you had told me after, 21 games, they're 15-6 as we record this. If you had told me that they were a half a game out of first in the West, I'm not sure I would have believed it. I would have put them somewhere in the middle of the pack, certainly in playoff contention. So in my mind, they've exceeded the expectations that we had for them, if that was possible. But are they the most fun team in Houston to watch? Oh, gosh, yes. I mean, that OKC game. I didn't get to catch a lot of the back-to-back overtime games, but I watched that entire OKC game. That was one of the most exciting Rockets games I have seen in a long time. Years. And let me tell you, we talked a lot about the young guys and their development and this, that, and the other. Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith, even Reed Shepard to some extent. But look, it was the veterans who won that OKC game, especially in the final minute. When you had Dylan Brooks tying up Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and then winning the jump and then hitting that shot when the clock expired. Then you had Fred VanVleet before that hitting that three as the clock expired. This is what you brought those guys in for, Robert. Not only to make those kind of shots and make those kind of plays, but this is a great example that these young guys can learn from. And if they learn that, then the Rockets are going to be even more unbeatable. But just the fact of what they've done in the first 21 games is truly remarkable.
And Steven, I thought the Fred VanVleet shot, it wasn't a game winner, but that was the shot of the year. And that really changed the momentum of that entire end of the game.
Well, yeah, I did, because without that, I mean, who knows if Dylan Brooks, even takes that shot, what kind of a difference it would have made. I mean, that was the starter of that sequence in the final minute for sure.
And boy, it got those fans. I mean, Toyota Center was going crazy.
Well, that's the other thing I want to address. Did you hear how loud the crowd was through a lot of the game? A lot of times it may get really loud if something really exciting happens. But I mean, that place was rocking, from what I could tell, for most of the game, because it was just so back and forth. I don't know. They had at least 7 or 8, 9 lead changes and half a dozen ties. So the fact it was back and forth, that place, that atmosphere was really something.
When you talk this week, you got to talk about the Western Conference Player of the Week. Can't say enough about Alperen Sengun. And we got to talk defense. Sengun defensively is unreal. He's now third in defensive rating among NBA players who played 15 or more games. Many of us thought we'd be lucky if he turned into an average defender. He's third in the league right now. Dylan Brooks is first, by the way, just an FYI. Bo Sengun's perimeter D and rim protection, Stephen, light years better. He's averaging over 2 more rebounds, over a block more than his per 36 last year. And yes, his shooting percentage is down, but for the third straight year, his turnovers have increased, and he's averaging a half turnover less per 36 this year than last year. And finally, Stephen, his assist rate is up for the third straight year. Barring injury, he's going to be an all-star.
Absolutely. He certainly should be. You know, in order to be a great defensive player, you have to work at it. And I think what that tells me is that Sengun and some of the other guys, you know, even Amen Thompson and some of the other Rockets, they're working at this. They're putting in the work to make themselves better defensively. And I know we say this all the time, that defense wins championships or defense wins you games, but it's honestly true. And if these guys can continue to get on the same page, you know, that's one of the biggest reasons the Rockets are doing as well as they have. Yeah, the shooting's been inconsistent. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. But if the defense can become the kind of consistency that we're beginning to see with guys like Sengun, oh man, you know, that even when the offense is struggling, or at least isn't, you know, quite as potent as it should be, that's going to make the difference, Robert.
There's another guy we got to talk about that's huge right now. Are you going to thank me, Stephen, for inspiring Jabari Smith? I mean, ever since I labeled him a bust a couple of weeks ago, he's a new man.
Robert, I'm telling you, these guys on the Rockets, they are getting the news that you are the basketball guru of Houston. I mean, without question. It's funny how you say that. We talk about the old Sports Illustrated jinx. Well, you know, the HST bump, you kind of, you know, even if you kind of slap a player verbally across the head, sometimes I get them going. I mean, I will take credit for that, sure.
Yeah, I bumped him sort of like Dylan Brooks bumped somebody. He's shooting 54.5% from three over his last 8 games. Again, let me repeat that. 54.5% from three. Jabari's pulled his three-point shooting back to where it was last year, so there's still work to do to make that official jump. But quietly, Jabari's free throw percentage is up over 5% from last season. That's a big deal. And keep in mind, free throw percentage, very indicative of your shooting prowess. And that's not all, Stephen. He's had 7 blocks in his last 3 games. That weak side rim protection we all needed from him, it's starting to be a thing now.
Yeah, it certainly is. And it is so good to see, Robert, because what this does, it makes the Rockets stronger in their depth. You know, it's already just unparalleled. And, you know, barring injuries, it's going to be tougher for other guys to get minutes. You know, Cam Whitmore's in the G League, so he's not even a part of the team. And you would think at some point during the season we'll see him again. But if Jabari Smith keeps playing the way he is, and that's just going to be another feather in their cap for the Rockets to keep up this momentum, because obviously, Robert, you know, everybody's going to go through spurts, or you're going to go through slumps. So if somebody like Jabari can pick things up, you know, if Van Vliet has an off night, or, you know, Jalen Green has an off night, Sengun has an off night, you've got other guys to pick up the slack. So it's just great to see Jabari playing the way he is lately.
Part of the depth thing, though, was Steven Adams and Jock Landale, who are not the depth that we thought they were. And what I've been begging from Udoka for nearly a season now is that Jabari is on the floor as the center and bench units. And I noticed everybody all of a sudden jumping on the Robert bandwagon over the last few weeks with Adams and Landale's defensive struggles and Jabari's ascension. But I love that Udoka's finally buying into the notion. But Stephen, he needs to be wary that, you know, this is a big deal in these substitution patterns, because he could risk overplaying Jabari. Jabari's got to be subbed out for one of the Terror Twins early in the first and third as quickly as possible if you're going to get him back on the court for bench units.
Yeah, that's right. And again, I've stressed this before. You know, if you're going to go with a certain type of lineup like that, I think a lot of it depends on the matchups. You know, who are you playing against? Can it be effective against a lineup, you know, especially a big lineup that is good at boxing out? So, but that is a factor, is making sure that you get the minutes where you don't overuse a guy. You know, he certainly used Fred VanVleet. He got a little injury and he came back from that, obviously. But man, it's a good problem to have, especially when everybody is playing as well as they are right now.
Yeah, there's no big guys. You got to, I mean, people just kept telling me over and over again for the last year, well, what about him getting bullied into the post? He's not big. I mean, this is not 1992, as I keep telling people. It's not 1985. You don't have to worry about that sort of stuff. Number 2, as far as rebounding is concerned with Jabari, you're not getting it from Jock Landale. I mean, he's not a good rebounder at all, I don't think. And Steven Adams, great rebounder, but not Steven Adams that we're
Yeah,
seeing.
you should be getting it from Steven Adams, and you're not. And
Yeah.
but didn't Jock Landale? I think the game after you went off on Jock Landale, or we both did. He had a great game after that. So again, another bump.
Yeah, mostly though, not good stuff from him. What about the national love this week that I heard for Amen Thompson? The Athletics' Sam Vecini called Amen the best perimeter defender in the NBA, and he put Thompson on his early All-NBA defensive team. And I was thinking, Steven, that with Amen, Dylan, Tari, Jabari, Van Vliet, and Sengun, this has got to be the best Rockets defense, man for man, that we've ever seen. I mean, including, Akeem could only do so much by himself, back in the championship years.
Yeah. That I was thinking about that, Robert, when you sent me that. I just can't think of another instance where they have had that kind of potential, all season long to be that. You're talking six guys that can play elite defense, certainly have the capability to do it. So if that's the case, I mean, if they're all humming like that, there is just no lineup I can think of in Rockets history that is as good defensively as what we're talking about.
And we got to congratulate Udoka, not just for the defense, but Steven, he just won Coach of the Week, right?
Yeah, in the Western Conference, or was it Coach of the Month? I know I saw it, but it was definitely an honor for him. So, gosh, the Rockets are starting to get that national recognition already, and that's what you want to see. I mean, we in Houston know how well they're playing, but it's really good when you see the national media recognize that.
Yeah, you're right. It was Coach of the Month, not Coach of the Week. So it's even better. It's a whole month, Steven. That's a whole month.
Yeah, whole month, man. 21 games it's a good sample size, certainly, to know where you are. You're going to have to maintain that the rest of the season. They've got a West Coast swing coming up, and they're in the quarterfinals of the Emirates Cup. And I don't know how much anybody gets into that, but it's a good thing to get up for. It's something to take the humdrum activity of the regular season. So that's something to keep an eye on too.
Also, I'm going to have Frank from Rockets Chop Shop hopefully in the next week or so. So keep an eye out for that. Sorry, I haven't had some more Rockets guests, but we're gonna get to that. Texan season's just been so nuts these days.
And they've been busy eating turkey and still recovering from it. So I'm sure that's part of it.
Yeah. Astros, though, just a minor Astros thought, Steven. A few weeks ago, I said the Astros should move Ryan Presley's $14 million so they can use that money elsewhere. Well, the Red Sox just gave 36-year-old declining reliever Aroldis Chapman $10.75 million after putting out virtually the same stats at the same age that Ryan Presley just did last year. I think that's got to be a good sign for the Presley market, Steven.
Yeah, it is. Although I still, $10 million even to Aroldis Chapman. I mean, I feel like he's declining year after year. So I'm not going to feel sorry for the Red Sox if that blows up and he has a bad season. But no, you're absolutely right. And, it really does make a difference what other teams do when they sign players, especially if you're in a position where you're looking to re-sign a guy or trade a guy and get that money off the books. So something like that, yeah, that could certainly affect the Presley market, whether it's the trade or if you're going to keep him on there. Yeah, that's interesting that the Red Sox did that. $10 million for Aroldis Chapman.
It's relatively quiet right now, baseball-wise, Steven. Anything that I'm missing with the Astros or baseball in the last? I did see that Rob Manfred is talking about bringing up a specialized hitter, you can bring up like maybe your best hitter. He's wanting to maybe incorporate something like that and any type of at bat. So in other words,
I think they're calling it the gold at bat rule or something like that, where like if you're coming up, Robert, I can send in Alex Bregman or Yordan Alvarez to pinch hit for you in certain situations. I mean, it is something he's talked about. Is it going to happen anytime soon? Probably not. We're starting to muddle baseball so much. I know that you can't be all old school and you've got to change with the times, but I'd have to do a little more digging and hearing more about that rule. But my first impression is, no, I don't like it.
Yeah, it sounds weird to some people. When I heard it, I guess I've become like the new school guy. I don't know what happened. I mean, I'm the old man, but I definitely am not traditional anymore about baseball. And one of the things that I loved, Steven, was when the Astros moved to the American League. I was so sick and tired of watching 7, 8, 9 slappies come up there and you have to watch this garbage, and you just go, I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'm going to go to the concession stand because nothing's going to happen. And this is boring. And, in other sports and the NFL and the NBA, the best players, you get to see them get the ball nearly every single time. Michael Jordan keeps getting the ball. The quarterback, he's always getting the ball. If you got Earl Campbell or Barry Sanders on your team, or Bo Jackson, or, Tomlinson, or, you could go all the way to Joe Mixon, you can give those guys the ball every single time. But in baseball, it's like, I have to wait through 8 other guys to see Jordan hit again. Geez, this is boring.
Well, but here's the thing. If you're going to do that, then why don't you allow multiple substitutions in baseball with the same player? Once you come out of a game, you can't come back in. In basketball, you can come in and out as much as you want, and you can give the ball to a guy as much as you want. Baseball's never been set up that way. You got to get everybody through their turn. If they're not good enough, get someone else in there. But, what I would rather see is multiple substitutions. If you're going to start changing that kind of thing, if you take, let's say you take Jordan out for defensive purposes in the 7th inning or 8th inning, why can't you put him back in the 9th when it's his turn to hit? That's kind of the thing I'd like to see. And I'm not a completely old school guy because I love the pitch clock rule. I don't love the runner on second base thing, but I didn't mind making the bases larger. The pitch clock thing, I think it's done a lot to trim the time on the game. So I think they have come up with some good rules to try to make baseball more appealing for the younger generation. But I think instead of a golden at-bat rule or whatever they called it, I would just prefer to see you being able to shuttle players in and out as much as you want.
It definitely would keep people in their seats. And I love your idea, Stephen. That's a good one. I mean, is that original, or is that something that you'd heard?
Well, no, I just don't hear much about anyone touting that. I mean, it's something I've thought about for years, because in my mind, that's the only sport that, once you come out, you can't go back in. You can change positions on the field, but once you check out of the game, you can't come back in. I haven't really heard anybody really touting that or tooting that horn as a rule change, but I would certainly be on that bandwagon.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit more baseball in a second, so don't go anywhere if you're an Astros fan. But really a sad note we have to talk about for just a second. Ex-Cougar football coach Dana Dimmel died at age 62, and if you lost track of Dimmel, he was a senior offensive assistant in Illinois this past year. He was UTEP's head coach from 2018 until last season. Yeah, Dimmel, disappointing, 8-26 in 3 seasons at U of H, including a winless 0-11 season. But he's a key offensive mind on those great Bill Snyder teams at Kansas State, and was part of 12 bowl teams at K-State over 19 seasons with the Wildcats, including his time as an All-American tackle at Kansas State. Actually played a little bit. I don't know if he got regular playing time, but played for a little bit with the Vikings in the NFL. He was just a football lifer, Stephen.
He was a football lifer. Sometimes not everybody is cut out to be a head coach, Robert. Some coaches are better in a coordinator or assistant, type situation. And, when you look at all those numbers of what he did as an assistant, I mean, bar none, certainly has a great reputation. But sometimes either you're just not in the right system, or maybe you just don't have the right mindset. As far as management goes, I've always preferred, if I had to be in management, or, in some kind of upper position, I like being in an assistant role, because you don't have to make all the decisions, just, something in regard to your department, maybe. So, but gosh, I must admit, I was doing a lot of work for the Hockey News today, and I did not see that news until you told me about it before we went on the air. So, gosh, very sad to hear, very shocking. I mean, that's certainly something I wasn't expecting.
If there's one thing Cougars fans have learned, do not hire Dana as head coaches. You're more
Holgerson, Dimmel. Yeah,
you're better off, or you're more inclined to maybe use them as a coordinator or something like that. It seems like they're better coordinators than they are head coaches.
That's a good observation. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. I mean, I always, when I think of Dana, though, I think of Holgerson just because it was more recent, but he didn't have any more success than, I guess he didn't go 0-11, but he almost might have, and then Dana Dimmel. But gosh, all the best going out to his friends and family over his loss.
Yeah, I saw on social media, there was a lot of nice things said about him. So, it seemed like a really good guy. Just didn't have the success here at U of H, but part of the Cougar family. I'm sure everybody has him in their thoughts and prayers. And A reminder, if you're new to Houston Sports Talk, it's our 12th year. You know, you talk about ex-Houston football coaches. We did a tribute on our YouTube channel to Bill Yeoman when he passed away. We've had over 300 guests, 1,500 episodes. You got to look at our Houston Sports History and Memories YouTube playlist, over 200 classic interviews with Houston sports legends. And, you know, how about we go back in our archives for a couple of minutes? 44 years ago today, back in 1980, the Astros signed Hall of Fame pitcher Don Sutton away from the Dodgers. It's a big deal back then. And when Sutton died in 2021, I had Astros broadcaster Greg Lucas on the show, and I asked him about Don Sutton. Here's what Greg had to say.
Don Sutton pitched for the Astros in 1981 and 82. He had a 24-17 record with the Astros. His ERA was under 3. It was past his prime at that point. Every year from 72 to 76, though, he was top 5 in the Cy Young voting for 5 straight years. But he pitched 7 seasons after he left the Astros. So even though he wasn't in his prime, he continued to pitch well into his early 40s. Greg, he was just one of those guys that, you know, beyond that little short span in the early 70s, he just would go out there and give you a good solid 7, 8, or 9 innings every game. He was very consistent, and he was somebody that you wanted to have on your team because he was an innings eater in a time where you could eat 8 or 9 innings in a game if you were a starter.
Yeah, he was. There was an argument I saw online when he got named, when he died, about his Hall of Fame qualifications. And I don't know who some of these guys are that are saying not a Hall of Famer. Well, obviously he's a Hall of Famer. The definition of is he in the starting rotation? If you have to put together a starting rotation of 5 Hall of Famers, no. He's not one of the top 5 greatest pitchers of all time, but he is certainly a Hall of Famer. You win 324 games as consistent as he was. I don't care if he wasn't the ace of the staff every year, that it might have been Koufax or it might have been Drysdale or it might have been somebody else. He was a superb pitcher, and I'm one of these guys that is big time on longevity. I think longevity makes a big difference in a Hall of Famer, and certainly he had longevity in addition to having a doggone good arm.
His win-loss record, 324 and 256, earned run average in his career, 326, 3,574 strikeouts. So across the board, all the numbers that you want, 300 wins, low 3 ERA, 3,574 strikeouts. And to do that over the course of that many years, like you said, with the Dodgers and the Astros, the Brewers, the Athletics, the Angels, and then he came back to the Dodgers at the end. But, you know, super long career, just the 4 All-Star appearances. Like I said, that brief run that he had that was just extraordinary. Led the league in ERA actually one time, and that was the year before he was with the Astros. But, you know, just a fantastic ball player. And Greg, what kind of a broadcaster? Was he a good broadcaster? Did you like him as a broadcaster? Because he did that for a long time.
Yeah, I did it. He was with the Braves for quite a while. In fact, still when they were a superstation. So he was. You could hear him for a few of those years before that the superstation disappeared. No, he was a good broadcaster. He knew what he's talking about. He could talk about pitching, obviously, but he knew a little bit about what the hitters were trying to do, and he did a nice job all the years that he was involved. Of course, for a long time, his son was a broadcaster in the major leagues too, and I was impressed with him. And he's a good guy. I didn't know him well, but I knew him well enough when he was a broadcaster anyway to say hi to him, or maybe be eating near him in the press dining room. But I think he had a great all-around baseball career, starting as a pitcher and then concluding really during his years behind the microphone.
Good stuff from Greg. And if you remember, Stephen, Hank Aaron died actually within a couple of days of Sutton, and you can hear the tributes to both of those in our Houston Sports History playlist.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I'd forgotten they were that close together. You know, Don Sutton, I mean, you think about it, Greg hit it on the head. Longevity is really, that's something that I you talk about 324 wins. How many pitchers now would be able to get to that level?
Nobody.
I mean, nobody, because I mean, not just with all the injuries, but, how many pitchers aren't going to pitch for 20 years or 15, 16 years in this day and age. So the fact that Sutton did what he did, yes, he was in the game a long time, but he may not have been the most dynamic pitcher, as you said, but he won games and he was over 500 with the Astros. I mean, I couldn't remember exactly what his record was till you said it, 24-17. He was certainly an Astros killer when he was with the Dodgers, when they had those great teams of the 70s. But there's a guy that just won games. I mean, that's what he did. And he won 324 of them. So it was great that even if it was just for a short time, that he actually did put on a Houston Astros uniform.
I don't even know if it's about pitching that long anymore. I think it's about pitching that long in the actual games. Getting 5-6 innings is not going to get you to 300 wins typically, because you lose a lot of wins when they take you out early.
Well, that's a good point. And then you talk about the injuries that so many pitchers seem to suffer now. You miss a year or, a few months or a couple of years, like in Lance McCullers' case. So, yeah, I don't know if any pitcher anytime soon is going to even reach the 300 mark, much less go over it like Sutton did.
So you get a little bit of free bonus Astros talk in a slow Astros week for you baseball fans out there. I hope somebody out there is enjoying some Astros talk. But man, God, Steven, I can't wait for the next Rockets game tonight. It's gonna be on by the time I guess a lot of people might have heard this, but still, just all these Rockets games are just really fun to watch, and to see these guys develop as quickly as they are right now. I mean, it's just amazing. And the Texans, they're young players. We saw some of that last year. This year, it seems like we haven't seen it quite as much. And unfortunately, one of the guys that we saw develop this year was Jalen Petrie, and he's out. We saw Christian Harris develop last year, and we haven't seen him this year. So hopefully we're going to get to see him. But that's the difference. It's just like the Rockets guys, they're just jumping off the charts one after another after the other.
Yeah, and when you think of what they've been through, especially guys like Jalen and Sengun, and what they've been through before this, with Steven Silas, and just the years that, oh my gosh, they were terrible to watch. I just could not watch a Rockets game. The fact that they're playing as well as they are now, yeah, I mean, why would you not want to watch a Rockets game, no matter who they're playing at this point? So it is exciting to watch. And, the Texans having a little more of a down year than we thought. The Astros got knocked out in the first round of the playoffs for the first time in 8 years. So you got to take it where you can get it, Robert. And right now the Rockets are getting it.
Yeah. And look, they might get to the playoffs and might not do anything. It's a young team, but I've heard some national people just kind of discount. They can't win a series or whatever.
But you got to get there.
Yeah. If they get home, if this continues, and even if they drop to the, lo and behold, they drop to the 4th seed or something like that. But if you're in the top 4 and you got home court in the first round, then you got a shot. And you could say, well, they don't have the superstars that are going to carry him home. Do not sleep on one Alperen Sengun. We talked about him in this show, and I can't say enough about the development and how quickly that guy and just the progress little by little. And I hope I pointed that out. The assists up every single year. The turnovers down every single year. The rebounding has gone up and up and up. Even his free throw percentage is up this year. Hopefully that can continue. But I mean, just do not discount this guy, because he might be able to carry you in some games in the playoffs. He's the real deal, man.
He is the real deal. And I know it's a long season, and there are just so many things that can happen, but you got to get there. And as I said at the top, if you'd asked me after 21 games to be number 2 in the West, I'm not sure I would have gone, no, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. But they are. How long can they continue it? Well, time will tell. But the fact that they're there right now, you got to get there first. And once you get there, anything can happen. And
I got to get excited about a couple of Houston basketball teams at the same time. I can't have the Rockets all of a sudden being so exciting, and then what's going on with the Cougars? Am I worried? Three losses early in this season? So hopefully they can get their stuff squared away. But great to talk to you again, Steven, and we'll do it again next week.
You bet, Robert. Have a good one.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.